relating to the homestead exemption, declaration of a homestead, and the contents of a tax lien.
Excuse me. Thank you. Representative Koppelman, welcome to Finance and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Representative Ben Koppelman from District 16, West Fargo. And it's kind of like a welcome back to the committee, I think, although I'm not sure that I'm wanted back, but I'm here nonetheless. So the first bill that we're going to go through today, and I'll kind of explain when we get to the next bill how this fits into the grand scheme of things. But coming into this session, I had some ideas on how we would avoid another Measure 4 coming 2 years from now. What we would need to do from the, since the taxpayers said no to Measure 4, I think many of them said no because the groups that opposed it suggested let the legislature deal with it, give us another chance, and then there was also an argument for keeping it local. But I think the argument for keeping it local was still give us another chance to straighten things out. So I think we need to have a plan on how we're going to straighten that out. And one of the, I suppose, lead-ins to why individuals wanted to eliminate property tax was they said, it's just fundamentally unfair. They would cite sections in our Constitution that say, hey, do I really own property like the Constitution says that I can own when the government can take it merely 3 years from now away from me? I don't know. So what the bill tries to do is say, if this is where you live, this is your homestead, your primary residence, that the government can't take it away. They can't make you liquidate it. They can't make you could take a mortgage out on it. They just can't take it away. What the bill does do, though, is it puts the county or city or whomever would have that tax lien in first position as high as we can put them as the state level, which is second to only child support. And I believe that's a federal requirement that does not allow us to place this above child support. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll just kind of go through the bill. I don't have any, flowery, complex testimony. It's just pretty much to the point. But in section 1 of the bill, this talks about, it just clarifies that for tax purposes, they can't take the property away. We get to, let's see, I believe it's section 2 of the bill. And this kind of talks about when a home can be forcibly sold. Now, this is kind of an interesting section in 47-1804, because if you look at the sections there, you'll notice that most of those things that they could force me to sell my house for are things that I agreed to begin with. I agreed to take out a mortgage. I agreed to hire a contractor and didn't pay them for their work. I could relate to that. I agreed to take on some sort of other debt. I didn't agree when I bought the house. I never signed anything that says I agree to give it up if I can't pay my taxes for 3 years. And so that's something that we've kind of got baked into the system. And unfortunately, the system thinks that the government's important over everything. And I want to kind of flip that script a little bit and say, no, it's not more important than having a place to live. So that continues to go on and say that you can't take the house away for taxes and special assessments levied. And then in section 3, in order for you to declare that this is your homestead, if you were otherwise going to be subject to losing your property like you could any other property, then you'd fill out a form, swear a statement, say this is really where I live. So I'm saying I'm declaring it as a homestead, so it's exempt from being sold forcibly. And then on the final page, page 3, which is, I believe, section 4, this talks about what the notice has to include if for a tax lien. Sub 5 is the new language. That's, I think, pretty straightforward. I'd be happy to go through that if you'd like. We get to section 5 of the bill. It talks about the lien priority. That's where it says it's second to only child support. So, Mr. Chairman, committee, this is really a quite simple bill. It's a simple concept. Private property ownership, especially as it relates to where I live, should be protected even from the government. And I should never be being homeless because I can't afford to pay my taxes. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Representative Koppelman, how are we ever going to get homeowners to pay their taxes if we don't have some type of ability to go after the property or, have some kind of a hammer available to collect the tax due? I mean, a homeowner understands when they buy a home that they need fire protection, they need streets, they need snow removal, they need all of the things that property taxes pay for. If they choose not to pay them, or if they can't pay them, how is the government to react to that? I know you talked about, well, they get in line on the mortgage, but that doesn't help them the whole time that somebody's gonna be living on that property. So how are we gonna get past that hurdle? Because the streets still have to be cleaned and the snow has to be removed, and they need the fire protection and the police protection. If everybody chooses not to pay, how are we gonna provide these services?
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me say this before I immediately answer your question. And I would say, many of you probably have kids, so do I. And as they were growing up and you give your kids an allowance and they spend it how they spend it, maybe they earn money for doing chores or some other thing, but they have a finite amount of money. And sometimes they spend all that money quickly and run out. And then all of a sudden they don't have money to buy food at a football game or whatever. And they're like, Dad, give me some money. And they said, well, I needed all the stuff I bought. I need some more money. So I kind of challenge the premise, first of all, that everything that property tax pays for are needs. I think you could make a long list of what many cities pay for, specifically cities, but you could also probably argue park districts. You could probably argue other districts. I would even maybe say you could argue fire districts in many cases with the amount they choose to spend to achieve a goal, that it's far beyond need. And if you disagree with me, I'd like to give you a tour of our fire station and our schools and our, all those sort of things. So the premise that they're all needs, I think I kind of challenge. But to your point, how do you get people to pay? I guess if I ask you, Mr. Chairman, if this passed, would you stop paying your taxes? And I don't expect you to answer my questions because I'm here to answer yours. But I believe that the answer is probably no. And you said, and then you're going to say, well, maybe why not? Why wouldn't I stop paying my taxes? And I'd say because the law allows them to compound 12% interest on you year over year. And so pretty soon the equity that you have in your home, whether you own it outright or whether you own a good chunk of it and you have a portion that's a mortgage, are you going to essentially reverse mortgage it to the government and lose it to interest and lose all that you've worked for your whole life? I don't think so. And so that's the hammer. I mean, the hammer is, interest that's compounding year over year. Now, if a person was at the end of their life and had no relatives and expected to pass away in 5 years or had absolutely no equity, I think that maybe is a concern. But for the vast majority of people, they're on their way up in life or they're not planning to be on their way down in life. So they're going to take care of that because they don't want to lose their equity to interest.
Questions, Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Koppelman. So it sounds like the bill sets people up to fail. Like they can basically protest out their taxes or not pay their taxes to the point of getting the home repossessed by the government in the end. But we're also then saying, if it's compounding at an interest rate higher than what the banks are doing, then how would they ever get out from underneath that and not fail in that process? And why would we set people up to fail?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Representative Porter, I don't know if I think that because they've accrued a high interest rate for a period of time that's setting them up to fail. I suppose if they did this for 30 years and had no equity left and took it out to the extreme, maybe that could be true. I think of anybody that maybe can't afford to pay their income tax when they should, and whether it's state or federal, and they get interest and they get penalties, but eventually they turn their life around, or at least they have the opportunity to, and they pay that off and they move on. So that was what my hope would be here. Now, this tax would have to be paid if it changed hands. So if somebody passed away and it went to their kids, those taxes would have to be settled before it could get put into the kid's name. So I believe the only exception is if it's kind of, let's say it's in the husband's name, but it's essentially owned by the husband and wife because their assets are mingled together. They can't call that a change in ownership and take it away from the wife because the husband passed away. But any other transaction would trigger that to be repaid.
Mr. Chairman and
Continue.
Representative Koppelman, if you don't pay your taxes, you go to jail. I mean, the penalty there is that eventually you go to tax court and you can be sentenced to jail. So inside of this bill, where is the part that says that at some point, and pick a number, I don't care what it is, that when the indebtedness of the unpaid taxes and special assessments exceed the value of the property, at what point does the property become the state's or the political subdivisions or whomever's, because now it's completely upside down? And where is it spelled out in here how in the end that's cleaned up? So if I choose to not pay my taxes, live in the house for 30 years, go on Medicaid, go to the nursing home and sell my house, and it's upside down completely, who backfills that other portion? I sell my house for 300. I owe 500 in back taxes because of compounding interest. Where's that $200,000 come from? On whose back does that reside?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Porter, I mean, that example in terms of the numbers you used is probably pretty extreme. I don't know how you could be 200,000 over what a $300,000 house is worth unless you live to about 200 years old. But
12% compounding can get you there pretty fast.
well, but at 1% a year average taxation currently, I think it would take quite a while. But to your point, I think that there's a few elements that are common. Most individuals that would choose to not pay their taxes over a period of time would probably be disincentivized to pay those taxes because they don't have much ownership in the property. You know, maybe they owe the bank 90% of the property. Well, in many cases, the bank's going to step in and pay those taxes. The banks don't let them go out forever. They'll if they get more than a year back, the mortgage company is generally paying it and adding it onto that mortgage because they want to maintain first position on that property. And this would put them in second position. So that's going to be the most likely outcome of who's going to motivate people to pay. But if let's say they didn't own any at all. Let's say they owned a $300,000 house free and clear, and they say, I'm never going to pay my taxes again. I think that if that extreme happened, I suppose the city would might lose the interest that they've gained or a portion of it. It's hard to believe that they lose their principal amount due on those taxes. But there certainly would be a cost to carry for the city or the county over that period of time. It's just that in most cases, they're going to come out ahead because of the interest rate. Now, whether or not it sets up people to fail, I don't think there's much incentive here to not pay your taxes, because you've got your mortgage company that's not going to like it if you have a mortgage company. If you don't, you've got an interest rate that's far higher than any other financing vehicle you can use. And let's remember that people have expenses outside of paying their taxes or their home, and they might need to borrow money to buy a car. Most people have car payments. Well, people that can't afford to pay their taxes or choose not to probably have a car payment. Well, they're not going to be able to get another car payment if they have a bunch of liens, against them and they owe a bunch of money, because that's going to take a hit on their credit. So I just don't think there's certainly an argument to be made that in an extreme, this city could come out upside down, but it has to be to the extreme. And if you net that compared to those that they do collect successfully with interest, I don't think they'd be net upside down.
You can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Koppelman. I think there's a whole bunch of other hinges on this door as it's swinging inside of our Medicaid provisions and spouses being able to stay at home and going on medical services, and one living in a nursing home, one living in the home, and how the equity in that home then becomes the property of the state of North Dakota. And then if it's upside down, then the state of North Dakota is paying the Medicaid component. And then when it comes time to sell the house, then there's multiple people standing in line to get an upside down piece of property. But you made a comment that really kind of made this even more interesting than it was before we started the hearing. And now you're expecting the banks and financial institutions to cover the property taxes and keep them current, and just add it on the backside of the P&I component of their loan. At what point do you think that lending facilities doing homes are going to leave the state and not participate in this kind of a situation? Because the risk is too great for them to be paying that property tax, depending on the growth of the property in the growth value of the property over time, that they're going to be upside down. And you're using the bank's money now to keep something current that is the responsibility of the homeowner.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Porter, I don't think that's a new element at all. I think that's a wrinkle that exists right now. If you look at the agreement that you sign when you have a mortgage, part of that agreement is not just so that the mortgage company can foreclose on your house and get their money back if you don't make the payments, but part of it, I believe, talks about taxes being current, must always be insured, things of this nature. And so the mortgage company is always protecting both their investment and their lien, or excuse me, the bank, whoever has the mortgage, is protecting their position, both in terms of their lien position, as well in terms of how much money they have invested in that property. And so that's a practice that's already happening, Representative Porter. If you see these properties that get close to the time when they would go repossess, if there's a mortgage company out there, they're out there as the first one to try to right that. Now, in some cases, if they've also not paid their mortgage payment, in some cases, the mortgage company might be paying that so they can get first lien to repossess. In other cases, they might be the first one to bid on it at a public auction because they haven't paid the taxes. But in either case, the mortgage companies are actively doing that now. This bill is not asking the mortgage companies to take on a new role.
Representative Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative Kaufman, yeah, on that line of thinking, so let's say the mortgage company pays the taxes. Does that allow them to go in the foreclosure process for the property?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Doctor, I think it probably is a violation of the agreement between them and the borrower, but I believe it's at their discretion as to when they decide to foreclose and what tolerance they have for people being behind. Just the same as, are they going to foreclose when you're late one payment or late 8 payments? That's going to be a decision made by the financial institution. And they're also going to make it based on how you respond if they question why you haven't made the payment. If you were temporarily out of work, but you just got a new job, I'm guessing that they'd probably cut you some slack. But if they didn't see that the money was ever coming, they probably would foreclose sooner rather than later.
You can continue.
Thank you. And that's my point, Representative. You have all these moving parts, but at the end of the day, I believe if you're not paying your property taxes, more than likely you're behind on your mortgage payments. And so I'm just, because a lot of them, if you have a loan, you have it in escrow, so it's all tied together. So it's ultimately probably not getting paid. That's what I'm just wondering, is that by this bill, does the mortgage have the same tools to do a foreclosure if people aren't paying? Because they're not in the first position as this bill states.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Doctor, the answer is yes, they still have the same tools. We have not changed their tools. Most of those tools are both in the law and in the voluntary agreement people sign. The difference is when they did foreclose, in order for them to transfer the property from the individual that no longer paid their mortgage payment to the mortgage company, that would be a transfer, and the city or county would have to be made whole on back taxes before the transfer could be complete. Much the same as if there's a proration of taxes if I buy your house, that's settled at the closing statement.
Representative Toman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Koppelman, I get the point of this. I just want to ask kind of a two-part question. So I believe, and the evidence points there, and I'm going to ask you if the evidence points there, that we get to this situation where people are unable to pay their property tax because, one, the taxing districts continue to tax the unrealized gains of what is not really an asset until you sell it, right? It's a liability on your balance sheet till you sell your home. So that's going up. They're unable to pay the taxes. So I would ask if you would agree with that. And then on the second part of the question is, I'm not sure how this would get us out of, it would keep their home, but wouldn't get that individual out of the hole, as Representative Porter mentioned, without changing that tax. Your thoughts on those two questions?
Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman and Representative Toman, I would agree that people's homes are liabilities. They're not assets. They're liabilities. If any property that you have that you spend money to maintain, whether it's paying your taxes, mowing the lawn, whatever, and you don't have a return on that investment where somebody else is paying you, like say in a rental house or a commercial property, that's basically the definition of a liability. Now you have it as a liability with the hope of the equity becoming an asset through growth someday in the future when you choose to liquidate that asset. But like to your point, it is an unrealized gain, you hope. It could be an unrealized loss, just depends on where you end up. But as far as how does this help an individual? Well, I think it helps an individual because when an individual has limited resources and they have to prioritize what they're going to spend money on, I'm guessing that food, prescription drugs, things like that probably rise to the top. And when they're making their priority list, I would say that it's possible even their mortgage payment rises above the taxes, unless of course they're worried about losing their house in the third year. Years ago, we had a process where it was 5 years, as I recall. It may have even been longer than that sometime before that, before the taxing authority could come take your house. And they came into the legislature and said, oh gosh, that's just too long. We need it and we need it now. And I'm just kind of looking at it, life, I guess, and saying, is the government, let's just say the park district, funding a new park shelter and their taxes that are paying that, is that more important than you're having a place to sleep? I don't know. That's a decision that you guys can ponder just like I have. But my opinion is, no, it's not as important.
Well, Representative Koppelman, you know, we've had in past sessions bills before us on foreclosures and sheriff sales. And in every one of those discussions inside of we've asked auditors from across the state, how many people have you removed from your home for non-payment of taxes? And in every instance that I can recall, not one auditor said one or two. The answer was always zero. We've always worked it out. And in cases where they have proceeded, like with a sheriff's sale, there's been other reasons and situations surrounding that have caused it. So what are we really trying to fix here? Because it seems the process, the way it is, seems to work. And I frankly don't buy the argument that you're only renting your property when you owe taxes. We owe taxes on every asset we own, on every dollar we earn, and that's just a fact of life. So, you know, I need to figure out what we're trying to really solve here, because this is a major change, and I don't think we can foresee the problems that might be associated with. You know, maybe it would work just perfectly, but the point is, what we are doing now, our current practice, is not causing problems.
Well,
Just respond.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if everybody across the state would agree that our current system isn't causing problems. I think there's a fairly large percentage of people, much larger than those that would have voted for Measure 4, that believe that property tax is not a very just tax. It's not a very, in some ways, productive tax, in the sense that it taxes unrealized gains. It taxes something that doesn't produce anything. If you owe income on for income tax, you had to earn that first. If you owe sales tax, you had to go have the money to buy something first. If you don't have money and you don't make money, you don't owe any of those taxes. But the problem is you always need a place to live. And so the concept with property tax in the big picture, and why many want to eliminate it, is just because it's almost as unfair as the old personal property tax we used to have years and years ago. Which used to say the tax assessor comes in and says, well, Representative Hedlund, how many suits do you have in your closet? I want to count. And then they charge you a tax on that. It was kind of like a wealth tax. And the thing is when am I done? When do I finally own my suit? And they got rid of it in North Dakota. The other piece that we'll unpack in some of these other tax bills is that the way we calculate property tax right now is hugely inequitable in how it's done. It's taxing unrealized gains, like we've mentioned, but it's also taxing two properties that we receive the services that, Mr. Chairman, you said were needs, which I slightly disagree with, but those needs are being assessed differently, even though people are receiving the same service, same sized house or same size property. They get the same, the policeman comes by just as often. The firemen are the same distance away, but all of a sudden one house is paying 50% more or even higher than the other house. There's no equity in that, not at all, unless we're going to take this huge unfair system, such as like the federal progressive tax system. Now, maybe you like progressive taxes, but if you don't, this system isn't for you.
Any other questions for Representative Koppelman? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Further support on House Bill 1343. Any further support? Is there opposition to House Bill 1343?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Aaron Burst. I'm with the Association of Counties, and we stand in opposition as currently written. This is always, as you know, a difficult time because none of us want to see people lose their houses. I understand what Representative Koppelman is trying to do, but I just have to bring a couple of things to your attention. First off, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, we've been for the last decade now, and again, this is the larger discussion of property tax, have been looking at how many homes we're actually taking on the county side, and it's slim to none. By far and away, the most homes that are ever taken, maybe because of specials, but even those are very, very small. Mostly the foreclosure process involves dilapidated property that people have left, abandoned. So the concept of counties kicking a lot of people out of their houses is not borne out by the facts. That said, it is possible. And so I recognize that reality. What I would say is this committee has addressed those kind of facts using the homestead exemption, the 65 and older who are struggling financially. The state has paid those taxes. Again, if you don't allow a foreclosure process and somebody does not pay their taxes, essentially all the rest of us do, because that cost will get paid by somebody else, at least in abeyance until the tax liability would become, come due under this bill. Again, I understand what Representative Koppelman is trying to do, and all of us are trying to do. There's maybe a way to figure out a better way to do that. But just outright saying there's no foreclosure on primary residences would become very difficult. And I think this committee, again, will have the opportunity to address some of those concerns by people that would be more fair and just. So obviously, this is the huge topic of the session. If this committee comes out with budgetary caps or essentially, like the governor said, a plan so no homeowner pays taxes, that probably solves some of this anyway. But Koppelman to see if there's a way that this can all be worked through. I would love to take questions.
Questions? Representative Dressler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Aaron, you said slim to none. Do you have numbers that you can provide for me?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Dressler will be happy to do that. Again, most of the numbers are commercial properties, but we will get you those absolutely numbers. Yep.
Representative Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Burst, in those numbers, could you make sure it's both county, city, it's the whole, all, not just yours?
I can, Mr. Chairman, Representative Steiner, I can strong arm my members. I'm not sure if I can always strong arm the cities and everybody else, but absolutely I'll try whatever I can.
Any other questions for Mr. Burst? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Further opposition to House Bill 1343.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Stephanie Ingebretson. I'm appearing on behalf of the North Dakota League of Cities. The North Dakota League of Cities stands in opposition to House Bill 1343. I don't want to repeat the points that my colleague from the counties made. We're really have the same concerns. I think setting it up so that there isn't a somewhat automatic foreclosure process for property taxes would potentially increase the people that are not going to pay. So I think we're going to see an increase in that number. I also, from my cities, hear concerns about the blighted properties. So properties that folks are living in that maybe aren't in a state that they should be living in, and that those properties are going to exist longer without being able to be cleaned up. So with that, we'd ask for a do not pass on House Bill 1343, at least in the state it is right now. And I would be willing to try to answer any questions.
Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So League of Cities and the Association of Counties, they're going to get us numbers. You can work with him to make sure those numbers are, he can strong arm his guys. Can you strong arm your guys to get the numbers of actual home residents that have been foreclosed on for that reason?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, I have a lot more members than he does. I can certainly try to collect data. I'm not going to promise it's comprehensive.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Well, maybe we could narrow the collection of data to cases where an individual was living on a property and removed from it. I think that might narrow the scope of it quite a bit. But, you know, commercial properties, we don't need that information to make this decision.
Mr. Chairman, I will try. I can probably get it for the big 15 cities, which is going to cover probably 92% of the population. It is. So I can get you fairly close to comprehensive data.
You know, I think that would probably take care of us because frankly, in some of the other cities, I doubt that the property tax burden is so bad that people are being thrown out of their homes, but maybe that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Further testimony in opposition? Or were there any other questions? I didn't see any, so thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Further opposition, House Bill 1343. Anyone else? Shelley's here. Any questions on property tax? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 1343 and we'll open the hearing on House Bill 1390. Would the clerk read the title, please?
Relating to the homestead credit and disabled veterans credit to provide an effective date and to declare an emergency.
Representative Koppelman, it's your day today in finance and tax.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm guessing I'll be back at least one more day here before this is all said and done. But House Bill 1390 in front of you, I want to start out by saying has some flaws that we're waiting on an amendment for. The concept here is that we want to provide a 70% reduction to how much a primary residence pays in property taxes. Okay. And in the drafting, we inadvertently, or the drafter inadvertently removed the over 65 homestead credit and the disabled veterans homestead credit, some of whom receive a benefit higher than 70% right now. And they also failed to install a fail-safe for someone who pays less than $500 in taxes now and essentially has 100% relief, might be like a mobile home, something along those lines. So those amendments are being worked on right now. I don't know, as you all know, council's pretty backlogged. I don't know how fast those come. But I did speak with the tax commissioner about the bill in the intended form versus the form it's in now. So I'll try to give you comments and numbers that deal with the form it will end up in after the amendment. So, Mr. Chairman, I in the previous bill, I alluded to kind of a long-range plan on how we could introduce a series of bills to eliminate the likelihood that Measure 4 would come back 2 years from now. And in order to do that, I believe that we need to provide reform, we need to provide restraint, and we need to provide relief. And so I refer to those as the 3 R's. And I believe they need to be provided in that order, because we've tried providing relief in the past. The last R first, without restraint, without reform. And I think we're probably $3 billion into that game, and no better off for it. Property tax is still the number one issue, and we had Measure 4 recently. So when the individuals look at what we did this session and say, did we do enough to satisfy those that think property taxes are a problem, whether or not they voted for Measure 4, but maybe to disincentivize them from supporting a measure like that in the future, we've got to do enough to have it make sense. So to me, if every primary resident got 70% tax reduction at their home, that'd do it. And it's probably tough for people to make an argument of how that wouldn't disincentivize somebody from wanting to bring Measure 4 back. So when we look at this is the reform piece, because that's the order of the hearing. This came up first. But the other two key pieces is we have to take care of the system. We have to reform the system. What was always our undoing on previous property tax relief was valuations. What everybody goes to complain about their city about, or their county maybe, is valuations. And so if we allow valuations to stay variable, it'll undermine any property tax relief that we do. So you'll see that in House Bill 1474 that's prime sponsored by Representative Toman. Okay, that's another day. The second R is the restraint. You've seen a couple of options for cap bills thus far. You have one coming from me, which is House Bill 1353. So I won't talk more about that now, but that's the second leg. So let's talk about reform. When we look at this bill here, as it's intended at least, the cost of this bill total is about $726 million. And $103 million of that are currently in the budget, which is the cost to continue the $500 tax, homestead tax credit. And so the net is about $623 million. And I believe once the amendments are done, you'll see a fiscal note to that effect. Now, if we compare this plan to other plans that you have heard, we have the NAITH plan, which essentially provides everybody $1,000, not $1,550, but $1,000, because 500 of that, or $1,050, because 500 of that we're already providing. I generally don't count what we've already done because people are looking for more. So to keep bringing that and regurgitating that doesn't do us any good. So it's $1,050 of new dollars. And what its goal is to buy everybody to zero from the bottom up. So 2 years from now, when you're back people are back at the ballot box, people have a chance to do another measure. The average people in West Fargo, where I'm from, which the average home value is just about $400,000, are going to see somewhere between a 10 and 20% tax break in most cases. I don't think that's enough to tell people to not go vote for a Measure 4. And so this plan at 70% really does a lot more for $200 million more. And let's remember, we had $1 billion left over from last session, not including what new money coming in. So we can afford it. But even if you were to scale that and say, we only want to spend the amount that the NAITH plan had, you could still cut people's taxes by 50%. And this probably has the easiest path to zero you've ever seen, because if you start at the 70%, you change the 70 to 72, 74, 78, 80, pretty soon you're at 100. That's your path to zero. It's not complicated math in terms of writing the bill. It's just simple changes over time, if that's the goal. But I personally believe that 70% would be enough for at least for a while. And if we have the reform and the restraint pieces in, it won't be undermined and backfilled like they were before. I would honestly discourage you from passing my plan or any plan for relief without taking care of reform and restraint, because I just think it's a waste of money. It's more money down the black hole. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm just looking here to see if there's any other items. I do believe that this would have a broader effect than the Louser plan would, even if you put the same amount of money into the structure, of anybody's plan. And that's because Representative Louser's plan is on all residential property. And the tax commissioner calculated that about 76% of those properties paying taxes on residential would qualify as primary resident homestead. So the Louser plan, you'd have to pay for another 24% of people to buy down whatever percentage you wanted to buy down. So it'll dilute your effect on people where they live, where they own their home. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions and give you whatever data I have.
Thank you, Representative Koppelman. And on your previous statement, we do agree. I think we do have to take care of the reform and restraint pieces first, if that's what we're going to do, if we're going down this road. You keep bringing up, we're trying to avoid the measure coming back. And, I don't know if any of us could say one plan is going to do that over another. Maybe they all will, maybe none of them will. In regards to the measure, do you believe that it's truly about people's desire for us to pay their property tax bill for them? Or is it about the state's budget and the excess money, and the people want access to some of what they believe is excess reserves or excess dollars being held at the state?
Well, Mr. Chairman, my belief is that the previous measure we saw, Measure 4, this last election, had two prongs to it. I think it was designed as handcuffs to the legislature to stop spending. And to be honest with you, we probably deserve at least one of those two handcuffs for the way we've spent over for the time I've been here since 2013. But the second piece, I think, truly was people wanted to be out from the burden. And so that's where I don't necessarily, the proponent of that bill served time with us in this body, right? So the proponent of the bill knew how we spent, probably had frustrations with how we spent, and in essence, kind of wanted to cap us, like we're talking about capping local governments. And so
He as much as said it in this committee, so we know about it.
well, but that kind of informs the reason why that might have been a motivation for that individual. Supporters wise, I think more of them that supported it were probably about relieving the burden on them at their home than they were about the piece of handcuffing government. So I actually think if it comes back in some form, it'll be more focused on relieving burden at your home, less focused on handcuffing the state government. And that's what might make it more palatable and might make it easier for them to pass it.
So curiosity, the bill is set at 70%. I don't really have any issues with doing relief in the manner that this bill does it. My question, I guess, is you're saying it's going to take at least 70% to satisfy those out there that may possibly want to bring back a measure to have the state pay it all. And I'm just suggesting to you that I've never talked to one person that thinks the state should be obligated to pay the bulk of their property tax. What they tell me is they want these automatic increases because the valuation increases to stop. And if the state can provide a little relief, they would be happy with that. This is providing relief for less than a third of the property and the property tax that is paid. And I think those people in that regard would be pretty happy with this package. Address how the other property taxpayers that are going to end up paying the bulk of the tab, how are they going to feel about this? Is that going to restrict them, or is there any reason why they wouldn't come with their own measure?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think there was a couple questions in there, so I'll try I'll start with the first one, which was, is 70% the mark where it tips people away from supporting a future measure versus are they content? Personally, I think that mark is probably closer to 50%, where that tipping point is. I've been looking at this for 12 months. And we can do 50% in this fashion for the exact same money as an 8th plan. I just don't like giving 100% relief at the bottom and 10% or less at the top and blend it in between through the middle, because I don't think that's people are going to not look at that as equitable. They're going to, and plus, if we've seen this in income tax, we bought out everybody on the bottom 55% of income tax, and now there's zero interest in abolishing the income tax from most anybody, or even flattening it. And I know that's a a pet of yours, Mr. Chairman. And we did it wrong. We should have flat taxed it. We should have had everybody pay something. And if there is a free board, have it be 20% or 10% of the people don't pay anything, not 55%. But now we've taken away the motivation. This path to zero and the NAITH plan is going to take away that motivation because you're going to give 100% relief at the bottom before you even get to 50% relief in the middle or the top. And in the middle of the top, I'm sorry, but those are the motivated people that sign and do measure petitions and donate and do all that stuff. They're the movers. So to that point, I think 50% is the magic. And if that's how much money we have as suggested by the NAITH plan, then we need to spend at least that. I think we can do better. I'd like to see us do better. Now to your point about the other properties. My focus in trying to come up with a plan for property tax was really trying to take care of everybody at their house. Because nearly every other type of property either generates income or has the reasonable expectation that it could generate income, whether it's farmland, whether it's commercial property, or even rental houses. They all would generate income. So you have income to pay the tax with. That's kind of the idea. So I wanted to provide maximum relief to everybody at their home. Now, this plan works for those in agriculture. If this plan works better for them than the farm home exemption, they can jump on this plan. Some of them don't get it. Same as those that are retired. If this works better than the current system they're in for over 65, they can jump on this. This doesn't have an income cap. The over 65 does. So all these are options to people. And I believe everybody where they live, if this were to be realized, would have substantial relief on their taxes at their house. And that includes those that stay on the farm home exemption.
Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Chairman and Representative Compliment. This isn't so much about taxes, but everyone accuses us of spending a lot of money, and we do. But you got to remember, in 2011, we dealt with two major floods in our state. We are now in the process of building dikes and flood protection for two major cities. We also built up the Southwest water supply, the Western area water supply, now NAS to provide water because our state is growing. We need to get water to the oil patch and to people. And also we had, I think maybe 11 bypasses we had to put around some of these towns because of the traffic. They just, we needed to circle the traffic around the town so people wouldn't have to worry about getting run over in their own town. So a lot of the money we spent, we had to spend because our state's growing. And as long as our state's going to grow, we're probably going to spend more money, but we're also going to make more revenue. So I think you got to look at the whole picture when you start talking about, us spending a lot of money, because some of it we had to do that. So,
and Mr. Chairman and Representative Anderson, I would say that I agree with most everything you said. I mean, I've heard the comparison during Measure 4 about us versus South Dakota and what we spend. And I'll tell you what, I believe we have better roads in North Dakota, and I'm thankful for that. My mantra in the Transportation Committee is, if we can build it, let's build it. I mean, we have the responsibility for the roads. To me, that's a fundamental function of government. Take care of the roads when you have the money. I totally agree with that. I think the criticism for those that understand where we've spent our money is that we spend the better part of $1 billion every session, at least $500 million, in things that aren't those things. It could even be more than that some sessions. They're, incentives to do this or hopes to do that. A lot of people see those as giveaways to private business, and they don't like it. And they say, wait, you only, whatever we muster here, there will probably be some people that say, oh, you could only muster $400 million for property tax relief, but you can muster several hundred million for maybe a fertilizer plant, like might be important to your district. I mean, not everybody sees that as a good way to spend money. I'm not here to criticize it. I'm just saying that's perception.
Representative Naring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, in my district, property tax, 67% of it is schools. So if you remove all the residences, basically, or the majority of it in residences, you're leaving the burden of providing schooling completely on agriculture and business. In what way would that be fair?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Naring, there's probably a couple ways I can answer that. One way would be to say that everybody needs a place to live, and they all go, well, maybe not those that work in government, but everybody else, goes out into the private sector and works at those businesses that pay those taxes, farms that land that pays those taxes. And so it's kind of a matter of where I like to tell everybody, you got your property tax relief at home. That's the way I like to say it. But I think since those businesses generate revenue, and we all know that businesses pass along taxation and costs of regulation, that's not something they eat, at least not in the long term. And so we recognize that that gets passed along. It's just it's a question of what makes the most sense. But where I'd like to expand on that is a concern that I have with, again, with the NAITH plan that we heard of about the bottom paying zero. I believe that every school bond issue that's ever floated is going to pass after that. I believe that there's going to be no restraint for things like, any sort of thing that you have to go out and get a bond vote for. And then you compound that with the fact that they go at a special election where maybe their employees turn out at a 5-to-1 ratio compared to everybody else. In my district, I think our school has probably 1,500, 2,000 employees. That can pass a bond at a special election in many cases. And so I think we have to be mindful, whatever plan we do, that we not take the burden off entirely and then have that run rampant and have the people who have no skin in the game vote for it, and then have those that have skin in the game try to control it. I believe there's another bill that's going to come it's supposed to come in the House. I'm not sure. There's a technical difficulty at the deadline. I'm not sure if it's going to make it in or not. Might come in the Senate, but that's actually going to give some kind of defense to those that are put on those special bond taxes, that if a certain percentage of landowners protest, the bond vote won't happen. And that they have to have it either at a general election or a general or primary election. And if not, they have to have some sort of a supermajority of those that voted for governor in the last election, as opposed to just 60% of 60 people. And that's a whole nother bill, but it's another way to protect against that. But I really think that some of these other plans, the Louser plan, for an example, that takes all the school mills off, except that it leaves you with discretionary and building fund mills. Well, if the schools say, hey, our tax on your bill is only $200, I mean, don't you want to vote for a new school? And so that's where I think there's going to be trouble. I also am concerned in that case, and we'll get into that in a later bill, but I'm also concerned that cap only applies to the political subdivisions other than the schools themselves. Well, I think that's a blind spot in that particular bill.
Any other questions for Representative Koppelman? Thank you for your testimony. Further support of House Bill 1390.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. For the record, Representative Jim Casper, District 46 in Fargo. I actually was not going to testify, and then hearing some of the questions, I wanted to just throw in a couple of issues of data which I could provide to the committee. As far as the frustration in the people of the state of North Dakota for spending levels, I have a chart from Legislative Council that shows our general fund in total legislative spending for the bienniums going back at least to 2011. And the 2011-13 biennium, this legislature appropriated a little bit over $11 billion of spending. In the 23-25 biennium, we've appropriated close to $20 billion of spending. So in the course of 10 years, we've almost doubled the spending. I think that's part of the frustration of the people of North Dakota. They're beginning to realize that. Now, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have spent a lot of that money, and we did it because we had the money. What I am suggesting is that the people of our state are saying, you know what, you have enough money to give away for incentives and corporate largesse. It's time we got something back. And that's the key. Another area, and I'd be happy to provide all of these charts to the committee, Mr. Chairman, the commerce budget for this last biennium has over $500 million of gifts and grants in it. Now that is money that could be looked at least part of it, to help in the property tax relief that Representative Koppelman was talking about. And the last number I'll give you is the number of state employees. Our state employees numbered in the early 2009 or 7 or something like that, a little bit over 10,000. We now in the 23-25 biennium have over 16,500 state employees. So what we've seen over the last 8 or 10 years of this legislative assembly is a continued growth in government, a continued growth in spending, and the people are frustrated because their property taxes go up and they're asking for help. The last point I would make about Representative Nary's question,
that the burden is going to be on agriculture and commercial. The burden, the increase in the budgets in the future would be, but to keep in mind, as I know you all know, that the property tax relief that is proposed in this bill and the other bills will continue on every year. So the residential property tax payment by the state, whatever that ends up being, will continue year after year after year. That's not going away. So the budgets for the local political subdivisions, quote unquote, will be whole for the 2025 dollar amount. So, Mr. Chairman, committee members, that's the extent of my comment, and I have another hearing I have to go to, but I'd answer any quick questions, but hopefully there aren't any.
Any questions? Thank you, Representative Casper. Further testimony and support?
Zablotny from Minot. I like to refer to myself as an unpaid citizen lobbyist, farmer from Minot. I would say amen to most of the two comments prior by Representative Koppelman. I think he's done a good job of bringing some of the real points. This is a very difficult topic, right? The tax relief is highly complex. And I appreciate the fact that I understand your, as chairman, your goal is to get through all the bills and look at it from a comprehensive standpoint and not just immediately take a position on, what has been forwarded right off the bat. So I do appreciate that. I did want to make one specific comment when it comes to, the idea that income producing properties can sustain or merit or pay for property taxes. Many of you are farmers on this committee and in this legislature, and I guess we can be happy today because our grain prices are on the upside swing and it'll be positive. Maybe we'll get to a break even, but at the end of the day, you have to realize that we don't have the ability to pass on our expenses. We take the prices that the market offers on a supply and demand basis. And so while other businesses can do that to a certain extent, farmers can't. And my concern about, I agree with the concept. I think there's, judicial and constitutional merit. And if you look at the history of property taxes, it was intended to only be placed on revenue generating properties, but we've got to be careful on the farm property side that we don't overburden, in the end. And also the concern I've had as well, it was expressed, is if we take all the relief off the residential properties and we give the political subdivisions the ability to pass bonds, where's the restraint from the folks that don't have to pay? We see it today. Nedrow School District, just outside of Minot, is a classic example of that. It's a little lower income area housing wise that has a tremendous amount of commercial and agricultural property, and they pass a school bond, build a new school without any problem, because most of those folks don't have the ability to even vote because they're not considered qualified electors because they don't live in the property. And so to me, that's taxation without representation, and that's the slippery slope of this process, which I just wanted to bring to light. And so again, I appreciate your work on this. I hope that in all these bills you find a resolution. The conversation about a measure coming back is reality if we don't see both real reform and restraint. And I think by simply subsidizing taxes and putting caps on is absolutely not a way to reform. All it does is it's going to encourage more spending. It'll encourage it right up to the limit on an annual ongoing basis for these political subs, because they don't know when their next need is going to be in front of them that they can't afford to pay for, and they may not want to face the taxpayers in a bond scenario. So again, in general, I appreciate the comments that were made on these two bills, and I guess, appreciate the work that you guys are doing in this.
Mr. Zlotny, I agree with you on a lot of your comments, and I want to tell you that I'm appreciative of the fact that we know there are people out there that understand how complex this is. You know, when you get into education funding and then with the relief focused on one class of properties, you know, the burden of that education falls on the backs of what's left. And it's not going to be easy. And I can guarantee you, no matter what this committee does and what ends up being the end result at the end of the session or whenever we come to that conclusion, there's going to be people that are happy and there's going to be people that are unhappy. And that's just the complexity of it. But I appreciate your comments. Are there any questions? Representative Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zlotny, there was a comment made by the bill sponsor that maybe 50% would be enough to satisfy and that there wouldn't be a measure coming back. What's your reaction to that? 50%, 70%?
Well, my own gut personal reaction, I was a signer on that measure to come with, that came, or measure 4, I should say. And I do support the notion that it was two-pronged, that it was a desire of restraint to the state government and it was the request for relief. My response to your question directly is that, yeah, I think that is a threshold that if it were hit, people would probably back off. Now, my concern is that what we need to accomplish, and that in Ben's words, reform and restraint. And if we don't have the right tools to do that, political subdivisions will not restrain, will not reform. As a matter of fact, you disincentivize those that were looking to reduce taxes because now they're being capped and they don't know that, you know, when they have a revenue need that they'll be able to find it. So that would be to me, a less than desirable outcome if, you know, we subsidize it to that extent, we cover 50%, and then at the end of the day, real reform never happens and taxes continue to go up and the burden falls on everybody left to pay.
You can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zlotny, so what we're looking at, if we give people money for their property taxes, we don't control property taxes at the state level. And then our citizens go to vote for people to represent them at city commission, city council, and all forms of local government. Do they become disincentivized to pick people who are going to lower taxes because they're really not responsible for them? So it's kind of a mixed bag, because your citizens are supposed to be voting for the government they want, and they have to be held responsible at some level as voters. And are they being held if we do a 70% level buyout from the state and they can say, well, my property taxes are pretty well covered and I don't really care to vote, or I don't really care who is on the ballot. I'm worried about their level of responsibility, because you get the government you vote for. So if you aren't happy with the government you have, you can go to the mirror and see who is partly responsible.
Yeah.
Because if you don't like who's there, you always have the opportunity to have someone run who represents your views. We are not involved with local property taxes and the levels. And what I'm hearing from my local people is the local assessor sometimes is subjective in his selection of this house here has this tax, this house over here has a little bit higher tax, and the neighbors talk and they're very upset about the subjective value of the way we have property tax set up locally. But how do you feel about citizens losing their I guess, motivation to really care about who is making those decisions?
Well, quite honestly, they don't have it today. People don't show up to meetings. I mean, Minot is a classic example. We passed a school bond issuance here within the last couple of years that tremendously raised the amount of property tax in North Dakota, and everybody was up in arms. And you go to the next school budget hearing where they're running a $7 million deficit. There is one person there to testify or to ask the school board questions about that. So they don't step in today. And that is a concern of mine, that people will, I don't think we've already demonstrated as a state that subsidizing taxes by the state to political subs only encourages more taxation, and the people will not put restraint on it. They'll be even more excited about passing the new gymnasium or the new community center and all the rest because they're not paying the tax. And so, I just read an article where our governor was questioned in the REC magazine, and he himself said that does not work. But for some reason, we think by putting caps on it that will fix the problem. And I can't disagree more. And, I was at the city council meeting, and I'm sure this is already old news for most of you, but last night in Minot, and they motioned to oppose caps because the whole idea that this bill was defeated on Measure 4 and all its proponents was local control. Well, now we're taking away local control, and we have done nothing to reform or restrain spending. So again, I certainly appreciate the complexity of this issue and know that you have a tough job ahead of you.
Mr.
Zablotny.
Just one more question for you, because I think it's important to understand exactly what all these different bills are asking. And what they're doing is they're taking one form of tax revenue and replacing it with others. So we're talking about revenue replacement, or put in a different way, redistribution of tax dollars. And I don't know that I have ever yet seen an example where I think that's worked very well. And I don't know how this in the end is going to work very well. I don't think it's going to have the impacts that are being looked at. But have you got any comment on how all these different bills are going to work when we take one tax and just pay the other tax with it?
Well, again, it's, I'm going to put it in the perspective of the foreign land ownership bill that I lobbied so hard for last session that recently got killed in the Senate. And that is, even when they put that to a study, the body failed to come out with something that the committee could pass because it's so complex and it's so difficult. And I see this the same exact way.
You're exactly right, because we've been dealing with this for 15 years and here we are.
And so, I don't know how to comment on it anymore. I know it's difficult. And at the end of the day, I think you have to restrain yourself from doing something that doesn't work, that you already know doesn't work. Sorry.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you for your Okay, Representative Naring has one quick one.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, sir, I've talked to a lot of people about this because I was a little involved on both sides. And virtually everyone I talked to that was for Measure 4 was completely ready to pay more in sales tax. Is that something you encountered?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the direction and the idea and the shift that can make a lot of sense, is replace revenues via sales tax. Because at that point we can choose to, what we spend, what we purchase, and understand and justify that. And that's truly now based on earned revenue rather than, revenue that we don't have. But I do think there's a place for that, an expanded place for that.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Further testimony and support. Anyone else? We're running behind, so we're going to try to move on. I don't see any Is there opposition to House Bill 1390? Any opposition? Any opposition? Seeing none, everybody understands the bill, I think what it's trying to accomplish, but if we have questions of the tax department, they are here. Anybody have any questions? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 1390. Committee, we are running slightly behind, but I think a bathroom break is needed, so we're going to recess for 10 minutes before we open the next hearing.